What the hell has happened to WWE the last 6 months?
Oh man, where do you start? Look, I'll start with the positive. In the last weeks, we've seen lots of evidence of long-term booking actually playing out. You've had the Sting storyline that you got your little second nibble of excitement last night with Sting. So that's a long-term plan that they've been playing out. You got they've long-term booked the ousting of the Authority and actually sacrificed a month worth of shows to have the anonymous general manager and guest general managers crap up the place till the Authority was reinstated. We saw that's clear evidence of long-term booking. They had a plan there. And obviously this firing storyline with the three guys, Ziggler and company, sign of long-term booking. So I think they have a plan. I just don't think it's the plan that meshes with what the fans want, which is always seems to be the divide with that company. That I think they outbooked themselves trying to pull one over on the fans, when really the easiest thing to do, the most sensible thing to do, is have Daniel Bryan win the Royal Rumble and go on to face Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania and give Daniel Bryan that shot at redemption to really have the title run that he was supposed to have last year before his injury. But as we saw last night, it does not look like that's where they are going.
Not at all. And the fact that Daniel Bryan lost clean to, well, not clean, I'm sorry, but to Bray Wyatt via pinfall. I mean, I almost consider it a clean finish given the fact we barely get finishes anymore outside of, DQs and countouts via interference due to Kane. If Daniel Bryan does not win the Royal Rumble, where do you see him going from here?
After last night, I am without answers because Daniel Bryan wasn't even in the main event picture last night. I mean, he was in a mid-card match and didn't even win it. So I don't know. If you just go off of last night's Raw, I gotta believe that Seth Rollins is walking out of the Royal Rumble as the world champion. And I don't know what you do with Brock. I don't know what you do with Cena. I'm in a quandary, man. Like I did sports radio in Philadelphia last night, and I don't really have answers. Like, to me, I think the most money they could make is Bryan versus Brock. Second, I think if you put the title on Rollins and you somehow build the Shield three-way for the title at WrestleMania. But I don't know. They brought Daniel Bryan back with all this fire, and then they beat him last night. Which, look, one loss, not a big deal, but he wasn't even around to sniff the main event picture. That last segment on a big go home show to your second biggest pay-per-view of the year. So I think also they might be a little worried about Daniel Bryan's physical well-being in a match with a guy like Brock Lesnar. I mean, the F5 is such a touchy finisher, and the way Brock works is so stiff. They might just be watching their necks and booking around putting Daniel Bryan in the ring with Brock Lesnar.
That's true, but it is unfortunate. I mean, granted, one loss doesn't kill a guy, but when he's technically your top guy, even if you don't necessarily see him as the top guy, and especially when it's his first match back on Raw in almost a year.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, look, it's like a few weeks ago when they had Cesaro cut that promo. Obviously, he didn't cut it. He didn't do it so well. They had him cut this promo, and you're like, finally. And then they bring out Wade Barrett and beat him. And then the next week, then Wade Barrett wins the title. And then the next week, Wade Barrett loses to Sin Cara. So it's like, I just don't. So many weird booking decisions week after week after week that just make you scratch your head. And I was giving them credit a minute ago for long-term booking, but then you see anything past the main event, the booking is so 50-50, nobody means anything.
I mean, what the hell is that mindset? I mean, you're still pretty well connected with a lot of guys within the industry. Is there any kind of, I don't want to say reasonable explanation, but one that's somewhat understandable that
Honestly,
maybe people watching can relate to at all?
I really think it's all of those power players in a room out booking themselves, getting too creative, thinking like, okay, here's what the internet wants us to do. So whether it makes sense or not, we're going to go in a completely opposite directions. Because I'll tell you frankly, there are a big pet peeve of mine is that, having been there in 2006, which is like 8 years ago at this point, but there were many times when something would be pitched or something would be suggested, and it was just a categorical, no, we can't do that because of X wrestling, ironclad wrestling law and rule. Here's a law that you never break in booking, and that's why we can't do X storyline that you just pitched, right? Mm-hmm. And those things were in stone. Those things, you had to learn them on your feet, and it was second nature to Vince, and he would not budge on certain things like that. Philosophical booking strategies. And then flash forward 8 years later, we are where we are, and week after week, I just see things that boggle my mind. I'm like, how the Vince I knew never would have okayed something like that. And it just leads me to believe that they are of a group mindset that we need to beat the internet.
I hate to ask you this, man, but is Vince McMahon out of touch in 2015?
Look, I don't think he's forgotten everything he's ever learned. I still think he's just as sharp and with it. But you watch that Steve Austin podcast, and he's talking about millennials and not having ambition, which, there's some validity to that. But you hear him talk about Cesaro, and there's just no way possible that a man in his closer to 70, in his 60s, can really tap into what his young fan base wants. As genius as Vince McMahon is, and I would never say he's not. The guy's right more often than he's wrong. But if he is truly the one making the decisions week in, week out, day in, day out, then I just think it's either he's out of touch, which I don't necessarily believe, or they've made a company-wide decision, a booking committee decision of, we need to surprise the fans at every turn. And most of the time, surprises are good in wrestling, but in this case, these surprises are just head-scratchingly mind-boggling.
There's also like 26 writers on staff. I'd imagine they're also suffering from too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Too many cooks in the kitchen, too much material that has to be produced. They have you can do the math, how many hours of wrestling they need to produce a week. I mean, look, bottom line is, why is NXT the hottest promotion in wrestling right now? Why is it the hottest product? Because there's only an hour of it. You only get an hour of it a week if you have the WWE Network. If you don't have the WWE Network, all you have is reading the recaps. So there's intrigue, there's mystique, there's, oh man, I need to see this Finn Balor guy. There's nobody on the WWE roster because of the 3 hours on Monday and the 2 hours on Thursday and the 1 hour on Superstars and the 1 hour on Main Event and all the backlogged hours on the network. There's nobody on the WWE roster that you're like, I need to see him. Even Daniel Bryan. The only one is Brock, and that's because they booked him like they used to book attractions in the 80s, where he comes once a month.
Yeah, but even with him, I mean, like, last night he came out to kick ass, and while he kicked ass later in the show, 3 hours later, he's like, I'm going to kick Seth Rollins' ass. Triple H and Seth come out and cut a promo. Cena comes out and cut a promo, and Brock's just standing there for 20 minutes, doing nothing.
Yeah. I thought it was weird that he was painted as the big babyface there at the end of Raw. Like, where do you go with that? If that's where they're going, they're going to flip Brock? make him a babyface on his way out. Again, that goes against wrestling law number one. Like, the guy doesn't go out. You know, if all the rumors are true that he's not re-signing with the company after Mania, why in the world would you ever make him a babyface?
Unless you have a really strong heel, and I mean, really the only strong heel they have. I mean, you have Seth Rollins, but I can't see Rollins, believably beating Brock without any help. I mean, I guess maybe Rusev, if they want to put Rusev over huge and not sacrifice him against John Cena, like everybody expects.
Look, I said it last night. Putting Rollins in that triple threat is just an angle alert. Any observant fan should know that that's an angle alert, and that just means that something screwy is going to happen at the end. Whether Brock goes over, whether Cena goes over, I think Seth Rollins is going to cash that briefcase in and walk out with the title. The other way you could do it is Brock hits an F5 on Cena, maybe like a third F5 on Cena, and then here comes Rollins, knocks out Brock with the case, and he scores the pin off of Brock's offense. But something's going to happen where Rollins walks out as the champion, I think. And then where you go from there, I don't know. Is it Brock Rollins at WrestleMania and Brock's the babyface? I don't know how much sense that makes. To me, WrestleMania, it's your biggest show of the year. You got to put your biggest money match there in the main event. And all of these different incarnations that they're teasing aren't lucrative as Daniel Bryan versus Brock. You could split the hairs any way you want, but there's no match right now with who's on the WWE roster that would make more sense than Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar.
Just assume that Roman Reigns does win the Royal Rumble, though, and actually do try to make Roman Reigns the next guy, despite the fact that clearly I don't think he's ready. Also, the material they're giving him is absolutely, positively horrendous. If there's one thing I liked about the Shield guys, off-screen based on interviews, it's that they seem to be pretty vocal about the direction of their characters when they were to Shield. If you're Roman Reigns right now, and you probably have a clue that maybe WWE wants to make you the heir apparent, isn't this the time to step up to the plate and maybe go up to Vince, go up to Triple H and say, hey, this ain't for me? Let me do it this way?
You'd hope so, but I think Roman Reigns is a guy who his strengths are not his promos, and so for Vince McMahon, the chairman, the star maker, to be dictating promos to him, there's not much a guy can say if it's coming straight from the horse's mouth. If Vince is telling you face to face, these are the promos I want you to cut, there's really not much you can do.
I mean, Stone Cold Steve Austin said no to Vince, and look what happened. Not saying that Roman's Stone Cold, I'm just saying. A lot of the greats, did kind of step in and take charge of their own character's direction.
It's a tough time to be an up-and-coming superstar, because what else? Roman Reigns has he's got no hand in the situation, to use a Seinfeld reference. He's at the mercy of Vince, because where else? Nobody can. Where else can you go to ply your trade? It's a great question. Lots of competition. The first thing that comes to mind is over your roster. I remember looking at roster sheets. We all used to get these roster sheets of everybody that we had access to on SmackDown, everybody who Raw had access to, and everybody who ECW had access to, and everybody who was in the developmentals. And there used to be flat-out arguments over who gets who. So in that regard, definite competition. On the other hand, I know the SmackDown team, of which I was a part, definitely at them ourselves as the redheaded stepchild, that all we wanted to do was beat Raw. We wanted to put on a better show than Raw. We wanted to outrate Raw. And yeah, if you can produce competition, I think it's better for the business. I mean, you see before my time in the SmackDown 6 era, that all happened because of competition between the SmackDown crew and the Raw crew. There's legendary stories of how those 6 players came to be on SmackDown.
And of course, the guy that was overseeing the creative at the time for SmackDown, Paul Heyman.
Exactly. Listen to Paul on Austin's podcast talk about the SmackDown 6 and how all he wanted to do was beat Raw, and how he wanted to make SmackDown a completely different show and get a new director in there and cut the promos differently. And he was in the edits, and he looked at he was WCW and they were WWF. That's how he approached it. So now where everything's commingled, I always supported the brand split.
I liked it. At first it started off a little precarious, but once it got going, like you said, with the SmackDown 6 and the legit competition between Raw and SmackDown was at times outrating Raw. And interesting, man, that might have been a downtime in the business, but if you were a wrestling fan, especially watching SmackDown, definitely a good time to be a fan with that SmackDown 6.
The problem is that Vince never bought in. Vince still only cared about Raw. So even those SmackDown only pay-per-views, I mean, they didn't draw so well, and then all of a sudden Vince was putting Cena in our main event just to pop a number. So the attention wasn't given to us. We were getting the scraps, we were getting the Raw scraps, and we weren't getting the guys from developmental that we wanted. So, and then poor ECW, they were really getting the shaft. So. Vince, it's the jewel of his crown is Raw, and that's all he cares about. I mean, that's mostly what he cares about, and that's another argument you could make of why his eye is off the prize, because the network is pulling him in so many things and putting such a demanding bottom line on his shoulders that he has to meet to get those subscriptions up, that his eye is off of Raw and his eye is off of SmackDown. That's an argument you could make in the other direction of why things are so haphazard. But I don't know what to think, man, because Triple H, apparently, if you believe everything you read, Triple H does such a good job on NXT. And then you watch Raw and SmackDown, and obviously they're longer shows, and they have network guidelines, and they have, parental rating guidelines and content guidelines to meet, and advertisers. But it's a completely different animal. But you certainly could make those shows more entertaining and more legitimate and just, I don't know, more competition than what they've been showing, and less of the shtick with the bunny and the Mizdow, as entertaining as it is. It's just like, it's so shticky.
I agree, and we both talked at length back in August about NXT and how WWE can further promote NXT and doing NXT showcase matches, which they've sort of done in a half-assed way if you consider beating the Divas champion Charlotte and her debut as actually promoting NXT. I look at NXT, by far the best WWE show right now, currently on the network. So if you're not subscribed to the network, you should definitely subscribe to it solely for NXT. NXT is awesome. But I look at some of the call-ups, and never mind the fact that some of these call-ups are just mind-boggling as hell. I mean, Bo Dallas, Adam Rose, Emma. Well, Emma was pretty good, but they just did nothing with her. Most recently, The Ascension. Well, you got guys like Kenta and Balor, and of course Sami Zayn and Adrian Neville still toiling around in developmental. I look at how these guys have been handled, particularly and most recently The Ascension. Watching Raw last night, seeing them just get absolutely demolished by the APA and the NWO and the New Age Outlaws. I'm just confused, man.
Well, look, the other side of that is, look, they got a rub from all three of those teams, and again, it's at least for me, it's evidence that there's long-term booking happening, because you see now last night was proof of why they've been having JBL shoot so hard on these guys week in and week out when they were cutting these awful promos and doing their thing. I've been an outspoken critic of how the Ascension was brought up and presented, and their promos and their vignettes and their work and their look. I mean, the whole presentation for me falls completely flat. They just look ridiculous. And it's like, it just doesn't play in 2015, that kind of deal. But I'm not as upset with last night as a lot of people just because, look, it's leading to a match on the pre-show with the New Age Outlaws. The point, you bring young guys up, you want them to work with guys who are better than they are, and guys who are more experienced than they are. So it's kind of like the Spirit Squad. They came up and they worked for a full year getting squashed by DX. So I think in the long run, it's good for those guys. I don't think fans will necessarily write them off, but on the surface, yeah, I can see why you would scratch your head. But what's more concerning for me is the look and the presentation and the promos and the whole package with them, as opposed to how they've been booked. I love the squash matches. I have no problems with that, and I don't mind them, getting jobbed out to a gaggle of legends. I really don't.
I just think it's so tough these days for fans to accept new guys. You know what I mean? Because so many times we see start and stop pushes, even Steven booking. It's almost like who should I get behind at this point? You know what I mean? Like one week a guy like Wade Barrett is getting momentum, like you said before. Another week he loses. I just think, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't Triple H supposed to be the next guy up after Vince McMahon? Shouldn't he maybe have more of a hand in how his guys are booked? I mean, okay, we could agree to disagree a little bit on the Ascension, but I look at like Charlotte. Charlotte losing to Natalya in like a 2-minute match on Raw a couple months back. I don't think that did her any favors whatsoever. It might be forgotten about in a year, but it did her no favors whatsoever. I mean, is Triple H doing the best he can as far as protecting his NXT guys and his NXT prospects, or could he do more?
It's a tough question to answer because I'm not there. I don't see I don't know what their long-term plan is, and I don't see the interactions between. I don't know that the fraction of what Vince is booking and what Hunter is booking. But every guy they've brought up has had their shot. Bray Wyatt, main event player for a month or two. Now he's back in the mid-card, not really a meaningful guy on the roster anymore, which is crazy to me. I don't know. I'm not upset like Sami Zayn and Finn Balor and all those dudes are not up on the roster yet, because I just think it's so crowded now anyway. So they should wait until there's a really meaningful thing for those guys to do.
That is true, but do you think, like, how can I word this? You mentioned before about Raw and SmackDown, and how SmackDown was always the redheaded stepchild of the WWE. Do you feel in a way, maybe not to Vince McMahon, but say maybe people around Vince McMahon, his longtime minions, that it's the redheaded stepchild of WWE, NXT?
Well, I don't know that, just because it seems to be Hunter's pet project. So I don't know how, I don't know. I don't know what to think of it, to be honest. I think there's so many guys on the main roster now that they don't want to just bring guys up to have them on to put them on TV, because there's not a role for them. Mm-hmm. But like the other thing too is WrestleMania is kind of the restart. So I think it's really hard to debut someone in the months leading up to WrestleMania. You kind of have to wait till after April, and then the summer is when you get sort of the new guys coming up, and guys go away, new guys come up. It's kind of like that 1 day off season, if you will.
There was a guy that was involved in NXT for a little while on the commentary side and the talent recruiting side. Now he's doing a little bit of everything. Writing for Fox Sports, doing some boxing commentary in FS1. Most recently did commentary for Global Force Wrestling and New Japan Pro Wrestling. He has a very successful podcast on Podcast One. And he is having a special one-man show. Home of Royal Rumble, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Your hometown. You're going to be the host.
It's crazy. Ringside with JR. I saw the very first show he did in New York, and it was fantastic. And JR gets up there and tells, look, the guy has been a part of every major promotion, every major angle, whether on the booking side or on the announcing side in every big promotion that has existed. So besides probably ECW. So the guy's got stories to tell. He's on the road with every big name you could possibly think of. He's got the best wrestling story, and he's not shy. So he gets up there, he tells a really good handful of hilarious, unbelievable wrestling stories, and then he opens the floor to Q&A. And again, it's no holds barred, man. You can literally ask him anything you want, and he is not shy. He'll answer it honestly. It's a really, really fun time. If you're just a really passionate wrestling fan, you're a fan of JR, obviously. You just like to hear really good wrestling talk and the history of the business. There's no better guy to spend a little money on buying a ticket to go see than JR. I'm honored to be the host in my hometown. It's pretty cool. And yeah, it's Sunday, 3 p.m. At a place called Underground Arts. And tickets are still available. And if anybody watching this or listening to this is in the area, they'll come down pregame for the Rumble with us. And I guarantee they'll have a good time. It's an absolute guarantee.
Lucha Underground. While they don't have a lot of viewers on Unamas or El Rey Network, man, they're tearing it up in the ring and as far as presentation goes. As a guy that not only worked in wrestling but currently works in TV and always tries to find new ways to present his respective product that you're working with, how impressed are you with Lucha Underground's overall presentation?
Well, shout out to my boy Chris DeJoseph, who I worked with at WWE, who's now co-executive producer over there and making a lot of that awesome wrestling happen. I'm slow on it. Obviously, the in-ring action is fun. I like the idea. The whole first season was based around a monetary prize and not a title belt. That's sort of old school and fun for me. But the backstage stuff is a little melodramatic and yeah, it looks great, but it doesn't really work for me, for my tastes. But the rest of it, yeah, I mean, the product's great. I love that the open door policy is a great move. That 1 week you could watch and Alberto Del Rio could walk in the door. The next week you could be watching and Bully Ray could walk in the door. So I think they're doing a great job. I love the episodic nature of it and that they have seasons. And I think they're doing a great job. I think they're really reinventing the wheel in a good way.
And I feel like Alberto Del Rio, too, has just totally reinvented himself as that Mexican hero. It's funny. WWE tried to book him as a Mexican hero, and it just came off so contrived. A real-life incident happens. He gets fired. He's had the most momentum since maybe 2010 when he first came on the scene in WWE.
Yeah. No, I agree. Sometimes WWE isn't able to see the money that's right in their lap, you know. Look, Randy Orton with the RKO out of nowhere phenomenon, they didn't capitalize on that at all.
Well, they kind of sort of like tried to, but yeah, they didn't push it enough, I think.
And Zack Ryder and Punk's Pipe Bomb. I mean, there's tons of examples of organic things that have happened that are cool in WWE, and they've just sort of turned their nose up at it.
And Randy Orton, he's been gone for a couple months, filming a movie. He did the injury angle with the Authority and everything. Assuming he doesn't win the Royal Rumble, which I think would be a terrible move in 2015, where do you see Randy Orton going in WrestleMania time?
If you read you probably won't agree with this, but if you read my column for people, I laid out a pretty, in my eyes, a pretty cool plan for bringing Randy back as sort of this Austin-esque, anti-authority, ass-kicking babyface like Austin, because when we last saw him, the Authority was, turning on him and beating him down, and I think they could bring him back. There's a way to bring him back and make him the biggest babyface in the company, but I don't think they're going to do it. But I just think, what I wrote was that I thought you could get to Orton versus Brock at WrestleMania, which would be an amazing match. And you could kind of reinvent Randy Orton finally after 10 years of watching him be this boring heel.
I do remember reading that. You wrote that before Daniel Bryan was set to come back, right?
Yeah.
You could still do Brock versus Randy. I think that'd still be one hell of a match. They give Randy his big win, and you build up a title contender after WrestleMania.
Look, I love that idea. I wrote about. I took the time to write about it. So again, it's fantasy booking, but I think there's a real opportunity to reinvent Randy Orton right now. And do I think they'll do it? Probably not. They'll probably bring him back with the same, same Viper character that he's been for the last 10 years. But it's a shame because the guy's really, before he got injured, he's doing some of the best work of his career.
Okay, we have a couple more fan questions here if you got some time to answer them real quick.
Sure.
Okay, first one here from George. Assuming there were multiple writers on your team similar to you that had some wrestling knowledge, the wrestling background, what would you say was the biggest philosophical difference between you and your colleagues and Vince McMahon?
It's a good question. The one that I dealt with the most personally was just the use of nostalgia. I mean, in 2006 was the time when Survivor Series with Flair and Dusty on the same team and all that kind of stuff. And we pitched so many fun stories around Steamboat and Dusty and Flair and that kind of stuff. And Vince just turned his nose up at it, didn't think the fans cared, didn't think the fans knew who those guys were. And it's one of the things I give Triple H credit for anytime I can is that he's sort of refocused attention on the legends. I mean, you saw him do it with Bruno and Savage and Ultimate Warrior, and obviously last night you saw all the people that came back. So there was definitely a philosophical divide between all of us who were fans and Vince on how to use the legends and when to use the legends and those kind of things.
Who is the superstar you feel like WWE missed the boat on the most at the time you were in WWE?
When I was there?
Yeah, 2006, 2007. Is there one guy that comes to mind?
There's so many. Ken Anderson could have been huge. Elijah Burke could have been huge. I'm naming all guys that I was working with, but MVP could have been huge, bigger than he was. London and Kendrick could have been huge. Yeah, man. Elijah Burke, big time. I mean, obviously, look, there's got to be something with that guy because he went to TNA, got pushed for a little bit, and now he's kind of disappeared. So perhaps there's more there, more to that story. But just in terms of look and ability and promo ability, I mean, that guy had it all. I wanted to make him the SmackDown's John Cena.
Okay, we'll take one more here. Andrew, who do you feel has a chance to rehab their career the most in 2015? And this person cites examples such as Dolph Ziggler, Ryback, guys that maybe had a push before, faltered, and maybe at a clean slate.
Well, go read my column. I definitely lay out a fun plan for Randy Orton, as I mentioned. And, yeah, I mean, 2016 really should be the year of Dolph Ziggler. I mean, it's time already. He's so close to the main event right now. He's sort of had a Jeff Hardy versus Umaga run, whereas Jeff Hardy's run to the world title was just every week watching him get his ass kicked, and he kept getting up, and it kind of just made him into a bigger superstar than he was. It made him a believable main event babyface, which led to his title reign, which was a pretty fun time in recent memory, was Jeff Hardy's whole title run before he went to TNA. I think they could do the same thing with Ziggler, and I think they've already been doing it this whole past few months with Ziggler, of just having him just get destroyed week after week after week and keep coming back for more and more and more. The fans are ready for it. They just have to pull the trigger.
And I think you'd almost kind of say the same for Dean Ambrose a little bit, minus the wacky skits they're doing with him. He's a guy that keeps coming back, still gets strong reactions. He hasn't been around as long as Dolph Ziggler in WWE, but I feel like he's also kind of got that weird, Jeff Hardy thing going for him. The fans just kind of are attracted to him.
Yeah, he's a good one. He's a good one. I mean, obviously, I think in terms of whose time is it? You know, it's about time that Dolph Ziggler has that push. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take one of the main event players getting injured to leave the roster to make a spot for Dolph Ziggler in the main event. But that's more of a indictment on the product and how WWE is run nowadays, as opposed to abilities.
I know it hurts that the Eagles aren't in the mix, but I got to ask you, who you got in the Super Bowl between the two number ones, Patriots or Seahawks?
It's hard to bet against the Seahawks because they have destiny on their side, and they've proven that they're clutch. But I think we're going to see Brady win a Super Bowl here and really solidify his legend.
The dynasty. I mean, I guess he's the John Cena.
If he wins this year, I think it just is a fet. I mean, look at what that does for his career legacy. I mean, he obviously. I think he's already passed Peyton Manning in terms of the greatest of all time list. I think it just puts him in the clear seat of greatest quarterback of the 2000s.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate it. Enjoy yourself this Royal Rumble weekend.
Thank you. Let's see. It should be interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely. Take care, man.